Thank you so much. First, I want to thank the people who worked really hard with me on this. Any of you who've done an event, and all of you who've done an event, know that they can be beasts. And if you're coordinating people from all over the planet and last-minute substitutions and trade-outs, and in fact, we're now getting slides from other parts of the planet coming in at the last second, you know what a beast it can be. So I want to thank a few people right off the top. And if they would stand up, Jim Joseph from Conan Wolf. Gail Hyman, are you here? Gail Hyman, sorry? Not yet, Leslie, thank you. So Gail Hyman, you'll see, will be moderating a really cool panel later today. She was a terrific help, so in her absence, give her a resounding round of applause. Matt, please stand up. Matt Harrington. Global COO at Edelman. Huge help in this, but also you should know they volunteered all the artistic work that you'll see in terms of the branding of PR Genome and the video stings that you will see that will separate each part of it. It's part of us in public relations getting better and better at visual packaging. So thank you very much to you and to Edelman. Now, are any of you worried at all about the changes going on in our industry, or should we just kind of call it quits and you can just go play hooky and stay here all day? Because we won't need to do this, all right? You worried at all? Are you worried about stuff at all? Not at all? Change? Yeah? Because we know when you look out there, the constituents that we would really love to have beyond chief communications officers are chief marketing officers, and we know, I believe the scientific term that they're facing is shitstorm. Because this confluence that they have to get their arms around, everything from so-called big data, forget big data, I mean even little data is huge in its own right. All the different avatars of social media, not just social media, but what happens to social media when it meets mobile. All of this is leading to an enormous complexity that all of us have to get our heads around. And we're really good at a lot of things in public relations. But as you all know from the Darwin quotes on evolution, it's not the most intelligent that survive, it's not the cleverest, it's those that adapt, survive. And so what this today is about is in search of our own PR genome, so we can rapidly evolve and more than survive, absolutely be at the heart and the center of a whole new world of very complex communications and marketing. And if we do that, we can be that. We don't need to be shrill or defensive or whiny or angry at other disciplines. We can just do it. So with that, let me tell you what today is about in terms of pointing out some of the areas where we can and should very rapidly evolve, and some of you already have. First is, we're going to hear from one of the world's foremost thinkers, scientists, writers about influence, about the dynamics of influence. How does it really work? And you might be surprised at some of the ways all of our businesses are predicated on. He might tell you, we're kind of wrong. We're kind of fooling ourselves about how we think some of the dynamics of influence work. We're then going to go into a little bit of a debate. Big data, good God, every magazine from lifestyle magazines to porn have big data on the cover, you know? So we're going to have a little bit of a debate, big data versus big intuition. And there are compelling reasons. It's easy to go, yeah, we need a bit of both, but we're going to try to tease out a little bit of those extremes to feel why and where we can take a side on this when we need to, big data versus big intuition. The other really interesting thing we're going to go through is the rapidly changing audiences. You know about changing demographics in the United States, but there are aspects of it you may not know. And so we're going to have a panel moderated by Monica Talan a little later today about the changing audience makeup. You're going to have, during lunch, right at the end of lunch, a really cool demo. Because a lot of us, and I know you, Flaherty, are really interested in this, are really interested in the behavioral sciences and neuroscience when it comes to communication. And this is going to be a live demo from a little company called Affectiva, which has gathered 5 billion emotion data points to be able to, not through a focus group, which most humans lie in focus groups, and they don't even realize they're lying in focus groups because they say what is either expected or what they think they should say. This reads your face through encoding of hundreds of muscles, pupils, and all these things for an honest reaction to whether my communications are moving you or boring you to tears. And so that's going to be a pretty cool demo that's coming. And then Gail Hyman's going to run a session on Is Disruption Dead? With some superstars on our panel. And we're going to finish the day with some eye candy. We're going to finish the day with going visual. I mean, we've been great as an industry at conceptual, at intellectual, at the word. We're getting better at visual. But let's face it, when you look at things like Cannes, and I know Renee Wilson is here, she's been president of jury, Dave Sine's here, he's been president of a jury that I've served on in Cannes. You know, PR never seems to do well at Cannes, and again, we can whine about whether it's an old cultural bias toward advertising, but the fact is, the visual narratives submitted by agencies are stunning, and they move you. And if you're in a windowless room for 12, 15 hours a day watching 1,900 videos, you stop going to big books of backup material and you get moved by a 3-minute video. So, at the end of today, we have 2 people who are experts at visual narrative. One is coming to us directly from the UK, an expert in visual narrative and things like infographics, and the other, the Huffington Post calls Vine King. This guy has more Vine loyal followers than probably any other human on the planet because in 6 seconds he creates unbelievable magic in just 6 seconds. So he's going to be here, and I'm hoping he'll let me reveal. It'd be like Penn and Teller, and I can reveal how they do a trick. I'm hoping he's going to let me show you how he did a couple of these incredibly magic finds. So how does that sound so far? That's for the first hour. And then the second hour, no. So what I'd like to do, and probably a lot of you like to work this way too, is when you're in a time of big change, I like to zoom back a little bit and think about, well, what were our roots? Where did we come from? What were our core competencies? So very briefly, what I'd like to race you through now, if we can move forward on mine to the AV team, take you to the beginning, and a beginning that has been painted as kind of ugly. I want to take you to the beginning of Edward Bernays, who I don't know how many of you have actually read Edward Bernays' works. He is good. He is deemed the father of modern public relations, but a lot of people, because he wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda, assume he was evil. But actually, the term propaganda came from the Vatican and meant something completely different for centuries and centuries. It was the propagation of information. So if you actually read Propaganda, which I've done again recently, it's a very fascinating book, and it's not evil. He also wrote another book that I'll tease you and show you with. But let's start by how the outside world views PR's origins. And if we could go to that very first conspiracy video. Just the beginning. Now, I know some of you might be feeling a little creeped out and thinking how you might describe the roots of PR to friends and family when they ask you what you're doing. And others probably thought, so cool, I can't believe he connected all those dots and did bacon and hairnets? How did he do that, right? So let me tell you a little bit about Edward Bernays and this that was actually First of all, everything in context. When he did this, there were no health contraindications for cigarette smoking. In fact, doctors did testimonials for cigarettes. So you have to put it in context that in the 1960s, Edward Bernays became a hugely outspoken anti-tobacco guy. So everything in context, first of all. And yet, the perception of PR kind of hasn't moved on a lot of times from this. Even, you know, the old gray lady, as journalists used to call the New York Times, as recently as yesterday, refers to us as spin and spinmeisters. So we need to get beyond that, and part of our evolution will take us beyond that. But the torches of freedom idea tapped into this notion of, remember, women's vote, the suffragettes movement, the women's liberation movement, which actually started in the 1800s but became most famous in the 20s and 30s. And so he tied that together, but here's the influencer side of it that was pretty fascinating. So he lived to be 103, Edward Bernays, and this is toward the very, very end of his life. And this is what he did. On the far left is Narcissa Vanderlip, wife of Frank Vanderlip, who was one of the most influential business people in New York at this time. In fact, there she is. Can you identify who that is on the right? First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. So he thought, well, how do I make green, and remember his mission was making green really popular as part of his mission for Lucky Strike. And he thought, well, what if I got the most influential woman in New York to host a green ball at the Waldorf Astoria? Well, she wasn't particularly allied with cigarettes, so that was kind of a tough ask. So he then figured out that Narcissa Vanderlip, her #1 mission in life was the New York Infirmary for Women and Children, a top-flight hospital. So he thought, well, what if we donated all the money from the green ball to your cause? Would you host that green ball at the Waldorf? She said, sure. Simultaneously, he went to the fashion editors, talked about the green ball, and converged the whole world for a brief period, because green has not been a very fashionable color for many years. But that year, green was enormous. So it was kind of brilliant what he did, but he depended upon his notion of influencers, right? Narcissa Vanderlip, he started by saying he hired debutantes to walk into the parade, his notion of influencers. Well, in propaganda, he wrote, in almost every act of our daily lives, whether the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct, ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And again, under the term propaganda may creep you out, but how many of you do influencer mapping now? Right? That's not creepy. It's not. You do influencer mapping, you do influencer engagement. It's the few who are amplifying out and influencing the others, right? Well, just to show you that he also went beyond propaganda, I won't read all this, but you should. Crystallizing Public Opinion is a really interesting work. And if I take you now to what he thinks PR does, play that. Let's set the record straight. He did not believe it was flackery. He did not believe it was mind tricks. He believed it was about dialogue and understanding your publics. Now, flash forward to 1955, a seminal piece of work by these two, Lazarsfeld and Katz, and you're about to see Elihu Katz, the student of Paul Lazarsfeld, who came up with the term key opinion leader for the first time. This entire piece was based on an enormous piece of research, all women, run by women, about women, in Decatur. Here's a little bit of background. So two-step flow process, something we believed in a long time, of course, until the advent of social media, which kind of did an end around of the whole two-step flow process of traditional media. And then came the book by Ed Keller and John Barry, The Influentials. One American in 10 tells the other 9 how to vote, where to eat, what to buy. They are the influentials. So this whole notion keeps building on itself. You can see it started with the idea from propaganda and builds and builds and builds, that if we could just identify and enlist the influentials, we can be very effective in amplifying and getting our message through and actually converting the way other people think and behave, right? Well, Malcolm Gladwell said, yeah, that's right. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point called it the law of the few, and he said you need connectors, mavens, and salesmen. And again, back to the same principle, that a few people kind of trigger everything else for the rest of us. Well, then along came our next guest, Duncan Watts, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him soon. He said that maybe Tipping Point is toast, as Fast Company wrote up this article. Maybe Malcolm Gladwell got it wrong. Maybe we're behind in times, perhaps, in understanding the dynamics of influence in social networks. So let me tell you a little bit about Duncan. Duncan is a former naval officer from Australia. He's a sociologist, a physicist. He worked as a professor for 5 or 6 years at Columbia University. He's currently the principal researcher for Microsoft Research. He has 3 books out, starting with Small Worlds, then 6 Degrees, The Science of the Connected Age, and his newest one, Everything is Obvious Once You Know the Answer. And we have 20 copies of that book, which is a fantastic book that he's going to sign to those of you who ask the 20 best questions. But right now, let me ask Duncan to come up onto the stage, because we're going to find out why all of this may have been wrong in this assumption in the past about how influence works. Duncan Watts, please come up. Welcome.